Our next speaker is Maarten Haijer, Secretary General of the European Gaming and Betting Association, or EGBA in short. Maarten will tell us more about, I think, markers of harm and how developing a universal standard or markers of harm can facilitate the early detection of problematic gambling behavior. Maarten, thank you for being here today, and the stage is all yours. Long time no see.
Long time no see, Willem. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for inviting me and speaking, and give the opportunity to speak to you. My main message is technology is key and cooperation is key around safer gambling. But there were a few discussions earlier this day that you also gave across that message, but I just wanted to get back to some of those discussions and maybe to highlight one or two things, and then in the end get to the technology part of it as well. And the first one, I think, in question of the markets, how they are regulated in Europe. I think we have now, everywhere in Europe, we have multi-licensing regimes, meaning that you can get a license, and based on competition, so supply and demand, the market finds itself in the optimum. And I think that's a very academic remark to make, but it's true. We had prohibitions in Europe, we had monopolies in Europe, we had no regulation, and all the jurisdictions, with the exception of Finland, have now veered towards competition. I think we should not forget that the market needs to function in a proper way, and there demand and supply needs to find itself, including via advertising. And I think we should not forget that there is a role for the market to play as such. There's also a very important role for legislation. We see across Europe now a whole stream of a second wave of legislation, especially focused on safer gambling and consumer protection. So the discussion that we have here today also takes place all across Europe in most jurisdictions. And I'm also not of the opinion that our sector is over-regulated or even heavily regulated. I think we're nowhere near the level of regulation that, let's say, the chemicals industry has, or cosmetics or medicine, where product development, testing, putting on the market, even the disposal of the rest, the waste, is all heavily regulated. I think we're nowhere near the level of regulation that some of other sectors find themselves in. So we need to find the right balance in, on the one hand, trying to protect people, including via regulation, on the other hand, making sure that it also works in reality. So I think that's the optimum we need to find. The key question is good regulation, not whether we have too much regulation. For me, what's really key, as I said before, also from our members, and we will show that later in June, because we hope to publish our third sustainability report, where we show the effects of direct intervention on customers. But the key thing is to have early warning solutions in place, as just set out by Rasmus, where you can detect at-risk behavior as soon as possible. That gives you the opportunity then to intervene with that individual customer, because we think that the technology will allow us already, but increasingly, to identify at-risk behavior and try to prevent harm from existing before, obviously, it occurs. So there, I think, is the future for safer gambling, a very individualized approach. In our report, we will show you the number of personalized messages that our members, 6 members, have sent out. Also the number of customers that have received it, and we've also measured success. And measuring success is a bit tricky, but we chose how many customers that had been intervened with on the basis of a personalized communication or an intervention had less losses over the next 3 months. And we're currently aggregating the data, but we will publish it later this month. So that's where the future lies. We don't think that regulation as such doesn't need to have place in the discussion. But also it became clear from this morning's discussion, it's very difficult to say whether a spending limit will really address issues of you as an individual. For someone that's on welfare, €400 loss limit might be way too much, whilst someone that's a football player and plays in Eredivisie, it means nothing to him or her. So these horizontal, although we understand the pressure that is on the regulator, and it is also on the legislator to do something, to come up with legislation, we doubt it will be effective or effective enough to really make a change. So not a one-size-fits-all. It means that operators need to invest heavily in safer gambling, in the systems that Rasmus set out. We really need to have that. It will allow to have the vast majority of people to play within their means as they see fit, but you can pick out those people that are at risk and try to nudge them in the right direction. We see it as an investment, it's not a cost. In the longer run, we're convinced that only companies that have sufficiently good safer gambling tools have a sustainable future, and that's now in Europe, but we think that will develop very quickly across other jurisdictions in the world as well. So it requires operators to really invest. We also think that the regulator, despite the fact that there's a lot of political pressure to act, and we heard it this morning as well, we have a review next year, but there will also be already changes announced in the legislation. I think it's better to take a step back and see the effect and analyze the effect before making change in regulation. We would argue very strongly that we should take a much closer look at technology, put a framework around technology, even require operators to have early warning systems in place. I think that could be a licensing condition. And you could be pretty strict about something like that. And I think avoid also discussions about certain loss and deposit limits that in, I think, most people's understanding, I think was earlier discussed as well today, a generic deposit limit doesn't really address an individual person's problem. So we think that having a proper technology in place, requiring that to be in place, is a better way forward than the more generic rules. I talked about the investment, regulators, then cooperation. I think this morning we saw a very good example of how it's still quite difficult to have good cooperation in place. If we want to move forward on the topic of safer gambling, that's not something a regulator can do himself or herself. It's not something that the industry can do itself or health experts can do themselves. It needs to be a collaboration between all of us. The operators sit on a lot of data, they have the customer base, they don't have necessarily experience of health professionals, and they don't have the tools that a regulator has. So we need to find common ground. And this morning's discussion was a very good example of why it is still difficult to find common ground. On the one hand, you want, as a health expert, not to be influenced by, or have the risk to be influenced by an operator. But at the same time, as I think she was called Floor, clearly said, we also need the data to be better able to understand what is happening and how people react. So there's still a bridge, still we need to go a bit further, much further, but we need to get there because as also clearly said, the customers of operators are the same people as the people that the health sector want to reach out and want to help. So we're all talking about the same people, we just need to find some common language. So we need to do more there, and that's one of the reasons why we as an association proposed to come up with the European standard of markers of harm, and Rasmus referred to it. I think it's a good example, it's just a starting point. There's way more that can be done and must be done. I don't know whether everyone is aware what a marker of harm is, but it is a change in your behavior online, so we're talking about online, that indicates that you can go to certain at-risk behavior. And the most obvious one is chasing losses, or starting to play at night, or exponentially increasing your stakes. So these are indicators that you might veer towards at-risk behavior. We've come up with a proposal, or we've proposed to the European Standardization Committee, which is the same organization that makes the CE mark, your sunglasses, and all the other technical standards that are out there that made by experts. We said, make a European standard on markers of harm, and that has been accepted. And now currently the discussion has started. So we're not in the driving seat anymore. We've given away the responsibility and the process and the outcome to this group. And in the group, you have authorities represented, you have operators represented, you have companies like Mindway represented, health experts, academics. And they are now sitting together to come up with a definition of each marker of harm, what it is and what it isn't. And at the end of the process, which we hope will end in 2024, we'll have a common list of markers of harm. And I think that's a very good example, but just a tiny start, of how we should come together and work together to identify and make sure that we can address really those people that need help, and it will allow also those people that just want to play within their means, which I think in the end is what we all want, to be able to play freely within whatever their means are. And I think that's where the solution lies for the future of safer gambling. I mean, I don't know, Willem, do you want me to continue? You think you're happy with a shorter presentation?
You still have a few minutes, but...
Yeah, well, just to say that I think for us the key question also, for instance, as an example, to come up with definitions. For instance, when we set our sustainability report to measure success, yes or no, we came up with the idea of how do you measure, how do you have a benchmark for safer gambling. And so the 3 months loss limit is something that we came up with, talking amongst ourselves, also to talk to some experts. But we came up with that benchmark, and I think that gives you a good example of why we need to have much better academic underpinnings of these discussions, because I'm sure when we come out with our figures, we'll be criticized either online or in other ways of why we chose that benchmark as a marker, as an indicator of success. So it shows you that there's a lot of need for further information and coming together of certain technologies and also experts. But we think we need to make that step, and we need to go forward much more quickly. In the end, I think it's also in our interest, because we want to avoid getting to a situation where we have to deal as operators with regulation that we know that doesn't work, but we've not taken the responsibility and the decisions quickly enough to invest in processes that do work. And as a result, we will have legislation come into the books that are intending to do well, but will not be as effective as we could have done ourselves. So I think it's in our interest to massively invest in these systems and make sure, rather sooner than later, that they're up and running, because I think that's the best way of providing consumer protection in the online sector.
Maarten, thank you very much. We saw some questions in Slido, so maybe one question, I think, Maarten, that was for you. If we can have Slido, the surprise question. Maarten, what would the process to introduce the SEN standard across Europe involve?
Well, I mean, the standard is being developed now by the experts. So that process is ongoing. At the end, there will be a list of markers of harm, but they will not be legally binding. So these are just technical standards, and they can only become legally binding. Either you have a European law saying, like for cars, these are the technical standards that apply to cars. They can also have European legislation. We're not there yet. We won't be there for many more years, so that won't happen. But what could be done is that you would have a legislator says, these are standards that I like. I will reference it in my national law, and there are a number of authorities very active, Spain, Portugal, France, and a number of others. So we think that either by making it law or by being part of the process of developing these standards and being part of the interactions and the common understanding, that either by making them the law or just by being part of the process, they will certainly influence the way that legislators look at markers of harm in their different jurisdictions.
Great. Maarten, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And see you again.